Right, good morning everyone, and welcome to the Council Workshop of Thursday the 21st of August 2025. This session we're going to be talking of appreciation of depreciation. In terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest emergency exit and assemble down on Devonport Road towards the Strand. This meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please speak clearly into your microphones, and please make sure everyone's mobile phones are turned off. Thank you. Just hand over for Councillor Baker if he'd give us a opening karakia. Thank you.
Mauri ora te whare, me noi tātou. Taua ke rā te moana nei e paripari kawana ki te akau tangata, ka ke ngā waka ka mauru te tohu ki te areare ngā mauwao, he pau herenga mōu, he pau hononga mōu, kia herea ki te tika, kia herea ki te pono, kia mau, kia ita, kia u, haumie, huie, tai ki e.
We have apologies from the Deputy Mayor as well as Councillor Schuler. Is there any other apologies? I have a mover and seconder to accept the apologies, please. Yeah, Councillor Roseboom, Councillor Taylor, thank you. All those in favour of accepting the apologies? Aye. Those against? Thank you. Now I'm going to hand over. We've got Catherine and Tracy are going to lead this, is that right?
Well, I was just going to do a quick intro because actually Fraser Smith and Tracy from Finance and Natalie Rosenboom from Asset, I'm not sure what your new title is actually, Natalie, have done a lot of the work. Okay. But just pointing out that this was a request from councillors recognising the very significant costs that are associated with depreciation. And it is a really good opportunity to focus on that stream of costs as we head into the next annual plan. So feel free to kind of join in the discussion and ask any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to make note, I think we're about 120 million in the annual plan in depreciation, so it is a significant amount, and it's good to have a bit more of an understanding. I know it was a question we got quite a lot during our consultation as well. So, yeah, I'll hand over. Welcome, Tracy and Fraser. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll just say just a couple of words before I hand over to Fraser. Those of you that were in the room before may appreciate that the title of this workshop is a bit of a nod to a previous document. Wave it in the air. You might be familiar with. So I'm not intending this to be a kind of a how depreciation works workshop. Happy to answer any questions along those lines if you have them. But this is more to help you understand the context of depreciation in local government, its drivers and its impacts, and basically why it matters to you. So we'll kick off with Fraser. He'll go through kind of more contextual part of this.
Morning. Right, can we have the first slide, please? Cool, thank you. So this is just a general introduction. So depreciation is an expense of council. It's basically amortisation of fixed assets over its useful life. It's kind of the technical bit of it. So really it's just recognising as you wear out an asset over time, you're wearing out that value. So that's about where anybody but tax accountants kind of get bored with depreciation. In terms of where that comes through to council, that does have a complete extra context in terms of it does have an impact on your cash and finances. And that is because under the Local Government Act, Section 100, a local authority must collect enough revenue to cover each year's operating expenses. So that includes depreciation. So that's where, in a local government context, depreciation is quite a different beast than maybe you've encountered it in other areas. So when I say you're required to collect that revenue to cover all the expenses, there are a couple of key exemptions to that, and the biggest one that we have for council in terms of the non-funded depreciation relates to the transport activity and NZTA subsidies. And that is because we don't have to collect that is on the basis that we expect that when we go to renew those assets, we are going to get a 51% subsidy from the Crown. And so therefore, obviously, it would be a waste of money to collect depreciation for the whole amount of that and then only spend 49% of that money when we actually go to do it. So that's a key exception and is used across right across New Zealand. Another minor exception is if council will specifically resolve not to depreciate a particular asset or not to fund the depreciation on a particular asset. We have had a couple of specific examples of that within Tauranga City Council, first being athletics track and the other being the speedway, where council actually made specific decisions not to fund that depreciation. And they were mostly around on the basis that those are assets that were donated to council, and it was anticipated that when they came to be replacement, they would be externally fundraised and that sort of stuff. So that's kind of the only exceptions that we have sitting in there to date, and I understand council has recently amended some of those decisions around speedway and things like that. So with that, in terms of accounting treatment for the depreciation, the money we collect in versus the money we pay out, many councils do not keep any accounting record, acknowledge that. Tauranga City Council, we do through what we call depreciation reserves. So basically what we do is separately recognise, if you like, a bucket account where here's the amount of money of depreciation we've collected, here's the amount that we've spent in terms of money going out, and then we've kind of got a difference, a balance in terms of here's the difference between what we've collected and what we've spent over the years. Also interest being calculated on that balance as well. The other thing that we take out of depreciation reserves at the moment, and then again that is specifically a council decision, is we fund our debt retirement from the depreciation reserve. So what that means in theory is that when you come to replace the asset, there is no money in the reserve and you're going to have to find the money. So for example, if you took $1 million asset over 10 years and you depreciated it over that 10 years, that's $1 million a year, and then you also did paid the debt retirement out of it, so you'd effectively collect $1 million of depreciation and pay $1 million out each year in terms of that debt retirement. So when you came to the end of the 10 years, you would have an asset that is worth zero, you would have zero debt on that asset and a depreciation reserve of zero as well. So you effectively have to go out and borrow. So that is a specific, decision of council not to fund the debt retirement over the top of the depreciation, but to actually pull it from the reserve. So that has had an impact over the years on the balance of our depreciation reserves. In terms of, next slide. Sorry, I'm clicking it on my screen. So in terms of the depreciation, just talking about the depreciation expense, so you can see there how that is looking at the LTP period, how that is increasing significantly over the time. I think that's about a 70 or 80% increase in the dollars over that period. And you can see for the transportation activity in particular, the difference, the yellow line compared to the green line, that is the difference between the depreciation charge and the amount of depreciation you're collecting rates on. So the difference being the non-funded anticipated NZTA subsidies. So those are all very significant expenses as a proportion of council and having a large impact on your rates calculations. Next slide. I also talked about the depreciation reserves. So this is where we actually, from an accounting perspective, keep track of how much we've collected versus how much we've spent. And you can see that there's various, some of the major asset groups, we have quite different outcomes. So stormwater you see there is looking very healthy. That is predominantly because stormwater is a relatively new asset in terms of there was almost nothing here before 1970 in terms of stormwater, and it is a long-lived asset. So most of the pipes and things like that last for something like 100 years. So obviously we're not getting into a stage where there's huge levels of renewals compared to the amount of depreciation that we're collecting. So those reserves are doing very well, thank you. Most of the rest are not. So we've got, you can particularly see the water and wastewater levels. They are dropping down to pretty close to zero. That is predominantly because of some really big renewal works that are happening over the next, the first half of the LTP. So you can see that's where those levels of renewals and the money that we're actually spending to replace assets are having a really big impact on our depreciation levels. Transport has been in that situation for a number of years, that it's really been finely balanced, but that's over the LTP period we've done some work, and that is starting to look a bit better. Spaces and places is looking fairly sad, and that impact is predominantly because there's a relatively low level of depreciation sitting in that activity, because a lot of the assets are things like land and things like that, so there's not a lot. So the big impact is the debt servicing coming out of that reserve is having a really big, so that's the negative impact there is predominantly relating to those to that debt retirement from the reserve.
Is that because we haven't revalued those assets to replacement cost? Is that?
No, we revalue all our assets on a regular basis, and it is one of the key reasons, in actual fact, that our depreciation charges are going up so much, particularly over the sort of last 5 years. Our asset revaluations have just been absolutely enormous with that thing, and that's one of the bits that really creates a problem in terms of if you have a 15 or 20% increase in your value of your asset, directly impacts depreciation, but you're sort of trying to you're comparing your rates increases to sort of domestic inflation sort of levels. So if you're getting a 20% increase in your value of assets flowing through to depreciation, and you're trying to keep your rates levels right down, that has been causing a huge amount of tension in terms of rates increases over the last few years.
So what, are we just renewing at a greater level? I don't understand how we can get into kind of a negative depreciation reserve.
Because of the debt, often it's because of the debt retirement that's coming from the reserve. So that's the example I used before. By the time you actually, if you collect the depreciation, put that in, spend 2/3 of that on your renewals, which would look okay, and then you spend you extract another pile of money out of there to do debt retirement from that same reserve, you effectively very quickly end up with a reserve that's effectively an overdraft.
Okay, so we take renewals out of depreciation reserves.
Sorry?
Because it doesn't seem to make sense. You said before that effectively at the end of that time you should be at zero, and then you've got to borrow more money to do the renewal, so
Correct.
You're sort of starting the whole process again. So I don't
Correct.
understand how that renewal comes out of the depreciation reserve.
It comes out of we can, in actual fact, fund that just from normal debt. That's the situation that we'd have to start getting into. Instead of funding renewals from the reserve, we would just fund that as a normal loan-funded debt.
Yeah, is that not what we should be doing?
Yes, that's what we're going to have to start doing as part of to keep these, or we might have to look at the proportion of how fast we actually renew that.
Yeah. Well, we shouldn't, if we're doing it by asset, and let's say, you've got that $1 million asset, you
Yes.
depreciate that fully over the 10 years. Therefore, if it was $1 million of debt, then, so because it's 100% debt funded, then
Yes.
therefore it's all zero. So there shouldn't be any renewals coming out of that. I get it if you only had 800,000 of debt, then you've got a 200,000.
Yeah.
But the renewal should only be that 200,000. You should never be able to get to zero. You should never be able to get below zero out of a depreciation reserve.
Yes, you do sometimes go into. There is a whole pile of things that cause that that have caused that depreciation reserve to go possibly into overdraft in the short term. So even without the debt retirement portion, so we only started funding depreciation from the Number 3 Act in about 1996, I think it was.
So yeah.
Also, we might have to, in certain situations, we might have to depreciate assets early.
Yeah.
Renew assets early. So in that case, but over time, then
it will get back to zero.
It should come back to zero. So,
okay, no, that's fine. I can understand timing differences.
Yeah.
I just can't see how we can ever get into a negative depreciation reserve. So that's fine if it's timing, it will come back.
Could I just jump in that Fraser did also refer to the fact that we're retiring debt. We're actually retiring it at an assumed proportion each year, so it's not where you have a lot of debt, or we have debt associated with non-depreciable assets, that is also contributing to this problem. And I think that as part of an LTP exercise, we will need to look at that problem and maybe, so for example in Space and Places, I'm just trying to remember, but I think the rate at which we're retiring debt is about 2%. It's 4%. Okay, so 4%'s okay for the 25-year life assets, but where, say, 30% of that debt has come from land you've purchased, then you're not getting the depreciation charge to contribute to the debt retirement. So through the LTP, and in the past we have discussed having extra rates funded debt retirement, and we will have to look at that, how we're retiring debt over time in these activities. Is that approach to just using your depreciation reserve adequate, or will we need to look at kind of the totality of that debt?
I would have thought we'd separate them out potentially, just from a transparency perspective, because you can only depreciate really what, like I agree with that, you don't depreciate land, so you only depreciate the part. But yeah, we do have to find a way, so no, that's good, we can have it. Yeah, Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. You'd sort of got to where I was keen to go. I guess my question is there anything to stop us in the same way that we push for a balanced budget, including fully funding depreciation in the OPEX for this annual plan, and the next annual plan as an interim step, could we push to separate out and make more transparent the debt retirement? Because from our community's perspective, they are seeing debt at a certain level and going, oh my gosh, the debt is going up so much. What they don't appreciate is that actually it would be even worse without doing this. But I guess the cost of that is that we have these negative balances, particularly Spaces and Places, which is a huge contributor now to council in a way that it maybe wasn't to such a significant extent at one point. So is there anything that would stop us from pushing the button on the transparency issue and separating that out?
In theory, no. In practice, that might be quite... we've been keeping the depreciation reserves since they came into being, which was, say, about 96. To go back and rebuild that from thinking would be tricky, but we could probably do some estimates and get there. But yeah, it's one of those things that's easy to do in theory, but in terms of actually getting numbers,
because I think it was
more tricky.
It was really our chief executive who made this a public issue by saying that it didn't have an effect on ratepayers to pay from the stormwater reserve. Was it nearly $30 million? Well, the balance of that reserve is currently less than 50 million. Looks from eyeballing at about 40 odd million. So if you add 30 million to that, you're talking a very significant part, and that was a media story which I then followed up with this council, and that was, they stuck to their guns, the commissioners stuck to their guns, it doesn't affect ratepayers. To me, that is really stretching the truth to breaking point, and I think we should use this as an example to kind of say, well, let's reset that conversation and have an honest conversation with our communities.
Just can I suggest that we just... we do report the balance in every annual report and every annual plan. We report the balance in these reserves, so we're trying to be very transparent, and we will, as part of this annual plan, put up a report to council about the status of the reserves. I think that is probably the best way, and how we would propose to kind of manage that. So the actual, a big review of debt, like it's a default, if you like, that we choose a percentage that we retire each year, and it has worked well within the council for the 20 odd years we've done it. It's just that we are noticing now, and there was a report in the LTP that talked about some of these balances. The way we dealt with it, or proposed to deal with it, was to not to recognise additional loan funding and renewals for a period, just to bring these back into alignment. So we don't want to have a really complicated solution. I think it's been a very good solution to run transparent depreciation reserves. So we don't necessarily want to complicate that, and I would say that is probably more an LTP decision-making process. But in the short term for this annual plan, we're really happy to say this is the status of the reserves, and this is the what you're proposing to do and what that does to the balance, and then refocus if we can through the long-term plan on how we kind of fund and report that and how that relates to our total debt position.
Just to be clear, my request was not just for that, because you can hunt through, as you just said, to find that. My issue is I struggle to see the debt retirement for each of those and what the impact of that is. So to make that clear, I'm not asking you to sort of redo the whole reserves. It's just to be very clear with particularly the sort of more recent history and looking forward what the debt retirement component is, because as we've seen, that's been a huge impact on our budgets.
That would be relatively easy to do, just to pull out that, because we already separate that out within the accounts. Just also note, I think I mentioned before, but most councils do not account for depreciation on this basis, so cannot tell you where that balance is. So that's something that we have been doing over the years.
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, this question goes right back to your first slide. You triggered me on the running track thing. So just interested to understand, when we're gifted something by the community and we don't depreciate it, and I look at Speedway, for example, we've got an asset there that's pretty disgusting now after not being maintained properly for a long time. How would that decision have been made? Is it a I don't know, policy, or is it just something that happens on the fly?
It's very much around this table in terms of elected members looked at that and made a specific decision and policy call in relation to both the Speedway and the athletics track. So that's not a policy call at all. That is a specific elected member to call.
Okay. Something to watch out for, because obviously these things do need maintenance and they do need replacement.
All right, thank you. Well,
Next slide, please. So when I was thinking about this this workshop, my thoughts kind of broadened somewhat, outside depreciation slightly, but around the cost of capital investment in total. The chart that you can see there, the blocks of colour are representing, firstly, depreciation as a percent of total operating expenditure, starting at 21% and rising to 26% in 2029, and also interest rising from 6% in 2023 to 15% of operating expenditure in 2029. So this is based on our, it's not our long-term plan, it's a revised position that we had when we looked at the annual plan 26. So as you can see, that those costs of capital as a proportion of total OPEX are rising significantly. And it's not just us where that's happening. Well, particularly in growth councils, there are similar trends. Sorry, Mayor, you look like you want to say something.
no, I'm just trying to look at the graph a little bit.
Right. Okay. The lines on that chart tell us something slightly different, but connected. So the pink line is depreciation as the year-on-year increase in depreciation. And what we can see there is that in the last couple of years, depreciation itself has increased really, really significantly, about 13% in 2023, up to about 16 or 17% in 2025, year on year. And there's basically two drivers of depreciation. One is capitalisation, bringing your capital program, your finished capital assets into the fixed asset register and depreciating them, but also revaluation, which we'll talk a little bit more about. The yellow line, I think, is a story. It is the total cost of capital in each year converted into a rates increase for that year. So in 2026, you'll see that approximately 7% of our total rates increase was related to costs of capital. With the data I've got at the moment, that remains fairly flat for a couple of years. Then it falls off. I don't believe it'll fall off. I think that's just related to perhaps some inconsistencies in planning. There are some caveats around that data. One is that it doesn't reflect increased interest costs relating to some decisions that have happened around, not so much decisions, but some things that have happened. So we're not going to have as much subsidy as we had assumed when we did the LTP, for instance. We don't have IFF revenue flowing in, so that means we will be borrowing more for capital expenditure. Also in 2027, there is a little bit of upside, I suppose. At the moment, it's sitting on a capital program that we need to bring down because it's sitting at over 600 million, I think. Also, we've had a little bit of a happy consequence from the OCR changes as opposed to what's flowing through in here. Having said all of that, I think the risk is on the downside.
So no, thanks for that. Just to get a couple of things clear, that rates increase, that is on both the depreciation and the interest.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think that paints a pretty good picture that all things being equal, you're not going to see a rates increase, just to stay at baseline. You're looking at what minimum of about 6% rates increase just to cover your depreciation and interest.
That's right. I mean, depreciation and interest on capital, that they are almost entirely rates funded across council. There is very little that is not related to rates funded activities.
Yeah. Councillor Crowther.
I might be missing something obvious here, but so excuse, but I'm just trying to understand the interest component is going to triple. But over that same period, the debt doesn't triple, like the debt on the capital investment doesn't triple. I'm just trying to get my head around how, and given the OCR thing that you just mentioned, I'm sort of just trying to get my head around why is it that I know it's going up significantly, so I'm not questioning the direction, I'm not questioning the significance of the issue. It's more just how does it actually triple roughly when the capex doesn't, and the debt on the capex doesn't triple over that time?
So interest itself rises from 6% to 15%, so it doesn't triple. Well, quite. It doesn't quite triple. Yeah.
Excuse me, that was my eyeballing the charts badly, but it looks like it. But
It is probably related to external debt. So within each activity, we run an internal treasury. Individual activities will hold a certain amount of debt. It is not the same thing as the external debt because we have offsets relating to subsidies and that kind of thing, the entire cash position. And that is between 2023 and 2029 as well, so it's not from now.
So is it tariko, like, is that distorting the numbers?
No, that's been removed.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Corrack.
Just earlier you mentioned the yellow line dropping off into the future, and you said, well, that's probably unlikely to happen because of something. Can you just elaborate on
Sure.
that, the knowledges of the future?
Yeah, so one of the vagaries of long-term planning is that people, when I say people who are involved in the planning process focus on the first 3 years, because in 3 years' time we'll be doing another long-term plan. So we have a relatively high degree of confidence in the first 3 years. That degree of confidence kind of drops off as we go further down the 10-year time frame. And what that normally means is that the capital program further out in the LTP that looks as if it's dropping back probably won't.
As I heard, particularly through the election campaign, is that the Commission has removed a certain amount of capital program to fit within a certain parameter of budgeting. So that will be addressed, I assume, within the next LTP process. And so would you view that as significant? Are we going to have to readjust those significantly in terms of those future projects that have been removed from the plan?
Remember waters, Rick.
Yeah, I think there will be a lot of decisions, and you'll start to look at what's sitting in that plan. There are some things that, like some new growth areas that might be sitting just outside, that will be reconsidered as to timing and to cost. And there are other programs of work or projects that as a council you'll consider whether you want to continue with them or move them to a later date. So that is very much the melting pot of the long-term plan, and you are asked to look through the 10 years. So yeah, I guess that's part of your prioritisation. That's probably all I can say.
It's just the risk of not having such a robust forecast into those later years, is that we're planning on something within the 3 years where perhaps we should be addressing in the earlier time frame to then allow for an increase later on. That's because I remember we had this discussion earlier in this term, and we're told basically, well, you know, the numbers out from the 3 years, I mean, I wouldn't hang my hat on them. But that's unfortunate. I'd like to hang my hat on because, you know, in the earlier planning, you've got to think of that future. And that, to me, the whole idea of a 10-year plan was to actually have reasonably robust numbers in there to assist with our planning. So it's just a message from my perspective, and perhaps into the next LTP, we might be a bit more prudent and robust.
I'm saying there has been, the 10-year plan has been as robust as it can be, and the pricing has been actually relatively conservative, and I understand there's a workshop on Monday that will take you through some of that approach to be more robust, which was included in there, which included a whole piece of work that looked at both our contingencies enough, because when we bring forward, in the past when we brought forward projects, they've cost a lot more than they were budgeted out, and so there was an effort to include what was called optimism bias, which is if you're looking now to something you're going to build in 9 years' time, you're probably underpricing it. And so there will, again, this will be covered at the workshop on Monday, an amount was added for what was called optimism bias. So I would say it was done as robustly as any future prediction can be, and it was, if you looked at the debt to revenue ratios, it was pushing to the maximum actually what could be recognised, you know, as capital that we would like to do. So what, yeah, I wouldn't question the robustness of it. I think what Tracy's talking about, and we've talked about before, is a lack of imagination. It's quite hard to predict what else is coming at you in later years. And so if you look at the and I think last LTP had much more in that final 7 to 10 years than any other LTP we've ever done. And what we have noticed is by the time you get to 2016, there's way more capital required than we thought when we did the 6 to 16 LTP. So just to clarify that.
Yeah. The other quick comment
Thank you for that explanation. But
the other one quick thing I'd just add in there too, I think there's slightly different in terms of the different types of expenditure, capital expenditure. So in particular, renewal capital expenditure, which Natalie will probably cover, is probably a lot, the planning is a lot more sophisticated around maintaining our existing assets compared to, say, looking at growth and levels of service information.
Councillor Crowther.
I guess I'll offer my view, which is that I think Councillor Kurak is maybe talking about something a bit different to what you're responding to, which is the staff have done a good job in analysing what you were asked to do by the commissioners. But from a governance perspective, we have a situation where we've inherited an infrastructure strategy that clearly stated for water, stormwater and wastewater that the plan does not provide, quote, all necessary expenditure for those items. And I use the word necessary, and I've always asked what necessary means, and I'm told necessary means necessary, and it's excluded. And secondly, that within those budgets, we knew as a community that the minister was likely to require us to provide more infrastructure for housing, and that was explicitly rejected by the commissioners in favour of the CBD infrastructure project. So I think in a way there was a bit of talking across purposes. So if anyone happens to listen to a council workshop, I think that's the resolution. What you say as staff is absolutely correct. It's really robust there. But from a governance perspective, the question is, have we got the right things in that plan? Waters has basically resolved part of that, but there is a bigger issue, I think.
This is drifting away from the depreciation topic a little bit, but thank you for your indulgence.
Okay, thank you. So there is a very big headline in that chart, just that capital costs are a very big driver of rates increases, and that growth councils have very high capital costs. Next one, please. So I thought we'd talk quite a bit about revaluation. This chart is representative. It's not real data from this council. It is just showing that if you have an existing asset base, you have a certain amount of depreciation, but then you get new assets that add depreciation, and then on top of all of that, you get revaluation. And revaluation, it occurs cyclically. It is calculated through those cycles on the vast proportion of our total assets. And for scale, our renewable asset classes totalled, at the last annual report, $5 to $6 billion. So even if revaluation occurs at what you might assume to be a kind of a CPI-ish level, it would add somewhere between 100 to 150 million annually. The depreciation impact on that would be somewhere between $1 and $3 million. When you add that to your extra capitalised assets that are coming through, when you look at the actual revaluation increases that we've had over recent years, which have been far in excess of CPI, you can see why we are having these huge increases in depreciation. So revaluations are required under PBE accounting standards. They're informed by unit rates within asset classes, and Natalie can talk a bit more about that. And it's important to get them right. So we get valuers to do the revaluation, but there's an awful lot of work that happens between Natalie's team and our finance team to make sure that that is robust, and it is audited very intensively as well. Are there any questions on that slide before I hand over to Natalie?
Councillor Roseburn.
Yeah, just quite a quick question for those listening. The difference between the public and private sector around how we value an asset over its life term. How do we set life for a particular asset? And then how's it depreciated over that? And the difference, like as a private, we don't have a market force portion to our value asset price, whereas the public sector have a market kind of assessment based on that. How do we arrive at a life term for an asset? Just pick library hall, whatever. How do we arrive at that? And then what decides the level of depreciation over that time?
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of research out there in terms of each of the asset types and how long it will last. So just for the expected life of an asset, typically for a pipe, we would think it would last 100 years. We've had pipes that lasted 100, and we have had pipes that lasted more than 100 years. But then we also have pockets of pipes that's failing early. So we've got areas where it's failing early. So every time we do the depreciation, we have a look at those useful lives that we have on our pipes, and we can adjust it. And then the same for the costs. We actually look at the actual contracts that we have for renewals, because the costs, the unit rate costs, might be different than what we have for our new growth areas, where it's in greenfield sites. And we look at the unit rates. That's what we actually paid. Our valuers compare it with what other councils, other communities are paying as well, and they sort of come up with the new unit rate for those, which is then, I think, as Tracy said as well, they're audited in quite detail. They focus in on the areas where there's been big movements and drill down in those, and then you need to be able to explain why that unit rate is higher, or why you've made that change in your useful life for your asset. Does that answer your question?
I'll add a bit.
Okay.
If you like. Yeah, so what Natalie's saying is absolutely right in terms of the useful lives and things like that. Another major difference between the entities you're looking is the basis for the revaluation. So basis for revaluation normally is market value, how much you could sell the asset for. Obviously, for council assets, there's not much market for a second-hand poo pipe. So what we do is use a depreciated replacement cost basis. So that's basically saying what would it cost you to rebuild that asset now, and then taking into account the length of life, the amount of life that you've had it in. And Natalie's covered really well the how we actually work out what that length of life might be. But so there is a quite different basis for actually calculating the renewal values compared to a normal business.
Because my basic rule of thumb has been if the maintenance is starting to exceed the replacement cost, that's when you look at replacing an asset. Is that the same principle here?
Right.
Okay.
Keep
Next
moving.
slide,
Thank
please.
you.
Yeah.
So apologies, that is a very detailed graph there. So as we've mentioned before, each asset that we construct in Tauranga, we've got an asset register where we've got this little asset, and we log all our maintenance requirements against that asset as well, so that we can look at sort of that curve and whether or not we need to replace it soon or not. So what you're looking at here is, I've got two graphs. One is looking forwards and one is looking backwards, kamua kamuri. So sort of walking backwards into the future But I'm going to look forwards first, so it's the one side of your pieces of paper as well. What you've got, and because it's so busy, I'm just going to describe a few things on here. It is all those assets that we've got in our asset register. So this is pipes, park benches, roads, street lights, forecasted when we expect it to be replaced. So it's expected replacement date. It's not forecasted based on the condition or when we've actually planned to have it placed, and against this actual current replacement cost. So that's if we were to replace it today. So I didn't take any inflation into account here. And I've got it down at the different colors. It's just a different asset type. So we've got water, wastewater, stormwater, parks type assets, and property type assets. And then in the first year, you will see there's quite a bit of a peak. This is sometimes what we can call the backlog. I wouldn't panic too much about that big backlog we've got. It's nothing that's going to maybe fall over straight away. But it's something that's sometimes referred to as the bow wave. It's something that we'll never lose. We will always push it along as there's tension between the condition and when we actually can replace that asset as well. The other thing that's the reason why I use the expected life and not the condition is the purple dotted line that you can see across the bottom of it, which is sort of the 10-year average replacement costs of our assets. And it's just slowly creeping up over time and creeping up over time. That would, if it's a really established network or old city, that would be relatively flat. But because we are a relatively young city, it is creeping up over time. If you continue to grow at the rate we are growing, we will be filling up at the back of it. So it will always be creeping up over time. But if you're a city that's in decline, we're going to fall over on the other side and actually get to that point where our replacement requirements is way higher than our annual depreciation. So what I've shown on there is our annual depreciation, which is the red line, just leveled out over the 100 years. And we're expecting, if you're an established city or a city with short life assets, that your replacement costs will be similar to your annual depreciation. So in asset management, that's typically the very first thing we look at is how does our renewal profile compare with our annual depreciation. And if it doesn't do what you expect it to do, you need to explain it. So if you're an old established city, it should be quite similar. If you're a young city, it should be a little bit less. So I can explain the differences in there if you guys wanted me to. And then in there, the graph also shows just the normal thinking that we normally do. So we think about the first 3 years of the long-term plan, or we think about the first 10 years, the long-term plan, or we go as far as the 30 years of the long-term plan. But it just, over the 100 years, it paints a slightly different picture. And then two other things that might be of interest is the National Infrastructure Plan, or the draft one that was published recently by the Infrastructure Commission, Tawanga, just shows that New Zealand-wide, at the moment, the ratio of working people versus retirement age people is 4:1. And in the future, in 2070, that's going to be 2:1. Interestingly enough, for Tauranga, at the moment, it's closer to 3:1. And then our average age of our water network is about 20 to 25 years younger than Wellington. So we always see in the news about Wellington's woes. And then we think, oh, we do asset management really, really well in Tauranga. We don't have those woes. But it's partly because we've actually got a younger network than them. If you turn it around, the next slide. It's a little bit of a glance. In the past, when major things were constructed. It also shows that 1996, which was a major date for asset management in New Zealand, where we really started focusing on, where we got the mandatory asset management planning in place, and when we really started collecting annual depreciation. So you'll see sort of peaks in the asset data every 10 years, and that's not because we constructed anything major then, as really when we started collecting asset data, and we didn't really know when exactly that asset was constructed. We put it in the first of that decade. It doesn't really matter, that's not 100% correct, because we actually replace our assets based on the condition, especially, and it's especially around the transportation assets that you can see that. The top graph just shows the different material pipes over time. The orange I've got in there is that asbestos cement pipes that I mentioned earlier, where we are actually seeing some significant sudden failures in the pipes and having problems with those pipes that's not lasting to its 100 years. And I've got a little bit in there, sort of a little grey block that just shows assets that we have replaced over time. I wouldn't really trust that information too much, as we don't necessarily keep those little records, those little ghost records in our asset information system, and we don't have it for transportation. But it just goes to show that, you know, over time we have been keeping up with our renewals, and we have been replacing our renewals. So in summary, from the asset management side, we've got an aging network. Our ratio in working age people are continuing to reduce, and this is just telling us a little bit of a story about affordability, and that it's just going to become more difficult and more difficult. It's not just Tauranga, it's a New Zealand-wide issue. That's why the government's looking at it, and it's a worldwide issue as well, as over time we've actually got a reducing population as well. So we're going to be struggling with it over time. For us at Tauranga, it just means that we always have to focus on good asset management practices. We have to keep up with our maintenance, keep up with our renewals, keep focused on our demand management, water metering, modal shifts in transportation, so that we can make the best use of the assets that we've currently got. If we do business cases, consider actually building nothing or building less, and how we build it, and always consider the maintenance and renewals costs. So sorry, that was a lot of information, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Correct.
Thank you, and I'm just thinking about the references to the more older cities and towns where there hasn't been any growth, and the pipes are getting older, and they're renewing, and the rating base is perhaps diminishing. We haven't got that problem, but I think another benefit in terms of a growth council, when we sort of talk about depreciation, is that the new infrastructure, I'm not talking about the current replacement of the existing, but the new infrastructure, as well as collecting depreciation via rates from those new growth properties, those properties are actually paid, particularly for their local infrastructure, up front in cash. It's recovered over the time of the development, and the council has no net debt. So, that puts us in a far better situation, because we're collecting the depreciation but got no debt to, repay. So, and that would, be quite a significant advantage, wouldn't it? Have you quantified that? Because I can understand from the new infrastructure and the new growth areas, when that's replaced, then they start, in the same regime as the rest of the city, but, to pay up front and then pay depreciation on that, it's always been, interesting for me. But, at the end of the day, it does help in terms of net debt reduction, but it can seem unfair.
Yes, and it helps keeping our network on average younger as well, because we always add these these as newer assets in play as well.
Councillor Crowther and then Councillor Baker.
Can you just tease out a bit more about the bow wave? Like I'm just really not following quite. I know what you're sort of saying about a bow wave, but in terms of the extent of it and what pressure that puts on renewals programs.
Yeah, so examples of what is in the bow wave at the moment, so in that graph, and I have to say the water, stormwater and wastewater also have a bow wave. They're just shown 5 years in advance because I took the latest valuation information. Yes, because in a valuation, if you get to the end of your life, so you thought your asset's going to last 40 years, it doesn't drop off the valuation and now suddenly we're not collecting that money for that year. They keep on adding 5 years to it so that you still collect that 1/45 of the money for that asset. So if you see depreciation as this is what it costs our current community to make use of the current assets in our system, it's almost easier to think of it that way. So, and I think I have a number here, on average per person in Tauranga, it's costing $550 per person to use all the assets in our cities, all the roads, all the pipes. So that's it's almost easier to think of it that way. But so in that backlog, for example, one of the things is Fisherman Wharf. We know it's end of life, but we don't really know still what we want to do with it. If we don't want that bow wave to become too big and become a problem, so we want to keep it in check, we want to keep it in rein, and we want to keep on top of our renewals. Because if we, for example, keep on pushing this out, and then we strike what some people might call the bow wave in the future, but it's more like the hump. If we strike when all the rest of the assets do come up for renewal and we haven't kept up with our backlog, that's when we're going to get into real problems, both in being able to afford it, but actually being able to deliver those renewals as well.
Just to be very explicit, like, thank you for clarifying the three waters, but the transport, again, I'm reading without the numbers, so I'm guessing it's $175 million worth. Now, if there's one common issue that I get that's not about, controversial public issues that we do from time to time, but if it's just the everyday running of council, it's that in my ward, roughly, 50, 60 years old, a lot of the subdivisions, it's the maintenance and the quality of our renewals on transport. That just comes up time and time again in terms of footpaths, in terms of not having the right cycleways put back, to be sort of repainted, to you name it, but particularly like roading. And what I hear from our transport team is that they're responding to governance pressure over years to, if you like, sweat the assets and just to try and just get it out a few more years before they do a full redo of the road. Wouldn't that, in theory, I'm not saying we suddenly jump to a different model with higher rates, but I'm just saying, isn't that exactly why we do that sort of thing and why we get public complaints about it? Because we've got this big backlog. To me, that just looks like the explanation for it.
Yes, in part this backlog is actually more collector roads, especially on the sort of sub-base and base course. So that's part of it, and then it is based on condition and priority of the roads, the replacements, and the other part of it, we are very dependent on NZTA because they fund half of that depreciation. So we don't actually, I've got our depreciation expense, but half of the transportation is actually the NZTA funding. Yeah, so it is. It should be okay in condition. It's just in here. It's based on what we would have expected its life to be, but it's replaced based on condition.
So that's an important distinction. I'm going to say that's an important distinction, the difference between its theoretical life, but it still has a condition that suggests it doesn't need to be replaced yet. So that's a really important distinction.
But it's also important that our transport team tell me that they try to extend the life because of the pressure on finances. So therefore, what becomes a theoretical life and a practical life, I'm just questioning whether our practical life is in tune with what our public would say is practical, or whether it's what our under pressure transport team say is practical because they're trying to stop us putting the rates up.
Yeah, Councillor Baker.
Cool. So it's only taken over a year, but I'm finally starting to kind of understand depreciation and how it works with council and its benefits. Yeah, so no, it's good. I appreciate all your guys' work.
Have you got an appreciation yet?
I do. Yes, good. You're such a dad. So, question, do we, and it's probably a real basic one, but just understanding how we plan for depreciation, do we also factor in the projected, what have I got here? Do we depreciate over projected population growth as well, or just the life of the asset?
It's just the life of the asset. When it comes to population growth, that's when you start talking about rates increases. So you'll remember during the annual plan we talked about rates increases after growth. So if you look at the pure numbers, the pure dollars of rates that we collect and derive a percentage, that's going to be one number. But then if you factor in, I think we used 1.2% of growth, then it comes back to be our average.
Gotcha. Okay. And then do we know exactly what asset classes either are currently not funded or partially funded by depreciation?
Yeah, it is only transport that has non-funded depreciation and, as Fraser said, some very specific assets, but only a small number.
All right. No, thank you. Is that the end of the slide deck? Or? Yep. Okay, I'm just aware of time, so just want to say a very big thank you for today's session. I think it's very useful, and we certainly have an appreciation of depreciation now. I just to ask one question, which I think has come up as well, and this is just an opinion, I guess. So, Whanganui have got some of the lowest rates increases in the country. And their decision effectively was around the Sargent Gallery, saying that people were paying interest on the Sargent Gallery that's just been developed. Therefore, they don't need to pay depreciation as well because they're effectively paying it twice. I'm not going to ask you about your opinion on that, but what I'm going to ask you is, so just on that basis, what's the most financially prudent way to do it? The Whanganui way or the way that we do it?
I think prudence is probably a subjective term. In my mind, I mean, councils do various things. So we aim to collect enough rates through depreciation to replace the asset at the end of life. And the machinations with debt are kind of rolled up in that, but that's the basic theory. Some councils actually rate to repay debt and also rate to replace the asset at end of life. I would call that double dipping. And certainly previously, I don't know what the current position is, but certainly previously audit considered that double dipping as well. It's very, very conservative way of approaching it.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And we're rolling straight into another workshop. So this workshop, but we'll do our karakia, etc. at the end of the next one. So thank you very much for the depreciation workshop.